Part 61. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 601. Bailey Hong I just felt that the man in front of her was a little disgusting, so she just smiled, and then said softly, "I'm sorry, Mr. Murong, I still have some things to deal with here, so I'll excuse you for now." After Bailey Hong I finished speaking, she wanted to turn around and leave. At this time, Murong Kong was staring directly at Bailey Hong I's back. He was just rubbing his chin, and the expression on his face became more and more exciting. Beautiful, simply too beautiful. I must get this woman. At this time, Murong Kong was thinking secretly in his heart. Of course Bailey Hong I didn't know that Murong Kong had already set his sights on her, but who said that the relationship between a hunter and his prey must be an absolute one? Of course, the person Bailey Hong I really wanted to get close to was Lin Yu. At this time, Lin Yu, after leaving firmly, came directly to the fence. Lin Yu lit a cigarette for himself, and then took a deep breath. He exhaled a puff of smoke, his face there was a flash of enjoyment. "Oh, I feel more comfortable here. It's really good like this," Lin Yu just said softly. But at this moment, Bailey Hong I slowly walked towards Lin Yu. Lin Yu also heard Bailey Hong I's footsteps, but he didn't have any good impression of this woman. Bailey Hong I walked slowly behind Lin Yu, and then said softly, "I didn't expect Mr. Lin to be here alone enjoying the night view. Is it possible that Mr. Lin doesn't feel a little lonely?" Lin Yu naturally didn't have any good impressions of Bailey Hong I, so at this time, the corner of his mouth only curled up into a sneer, and then he waved his hand casually. "I'm sorry, I really don't think it's lonely to enjoy the night view alone, but sometimes it's not the person who's lonely, but maybe the person's heart. I don't know if I'm right or not, Miss Bailey." After Lin Yu finished speaking, he turned around, staring directly at Bailey Hong I, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. After Bailey Hong I heard what Lin Yu said, her pretty face blushed slightly, and then she waved her hand. "Mr. Lin, what you said is true. This is the most reasonable thing in the world. I admire you in red." Lin Yu just waved his hand, and then smiled slightly like this, "You don't have to admire me, but I should admire Miss Bailey." Bailey Hong I's face condensed slightly, and then she whispered, "I don't understand what Mr. Lin means. I don't understand why Mr. Lin admires me." Bailey Hong I turned her head and stared straight at Lin Yu. She looked at Lin Yu with a smile on her face, and a hint of amusement flashed in her eyes. At this time, Lin Yu just waved his hand casually, and then coughed lightly. "Ahem, because Miss Bailey is worthy of admiration, but I always feel that sometimes Miss Bailey's competitive spirit is really a burden. But this is just a personal feeling. If Miss Bailey doesn't believe it, if so, then of course you can ignore it." The night breeze was blowing. Bailey Hong I just felt that the man in front of him was a little different. As for what was different about Bailey Hong I, he couldn't explain it clearly. He just felt that this man was so different from the men outside. Point. At this time, Bailey Hong I was even a little stunned. His eyes were staring directly at Lin Yu's back, and his expression was a bit complicated. At this time, after Lin Yu saw Bailey Hong I like this, he just felt that he could never be contaminated by this woman, otherwise once he got into trouble with this woman, it would be difficult to escape. This Murong Kong also walked out of the hall. By coincidence, the direction he walked was exactly towards Lin Yu and the others. Murong Kong came to the garden. After walking for a while, he saw Bailey Hong I who was staying with Lin Yu. You must know that Murong Kong seems to have regarded Bailey Hong I as his woman, so this guy also felt a surge of energy and blood at this moment, and finally walked towards Lin Yu. At this time, Lin Yu seemed to feel a murderous aura surging behind him, so he glanced behind him subconsciously, and then he saw a guy walking towards behind him, with an angry look on his face. It's just that Murongkong is a young man from a rich family who still has some basic qualities. Murongkong glanced coldly at Lin Yu, and then took a deep breath. At this time, Murongkong, although a little jealous, still tried his best to pretend not to care. Murongkong glanced at the two of them, and just smiled awkwardly. "Miss Bailey, I thought you had left just now, but I didn't expect to meet you again when I came to this garden. The two of us are still, what a fate." At this time, Murongkong said softly, and then smiled like this. At this time, Bailey Hong Ai, although she had no interest in the man in front of her, still smiled politely. What Mr. Murong said is really true. We two are really destined to meet. When I met Mr. Murong today, it was like an old friend who hadn't seen each other for many years. After seeing the two of them, Lin Yu just smiled, and then coughed lightly. Ahem, since the two of you are having a good chat, I won't bother you anymore. Goodbye, goodbye. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he wanted to turn around and leave. Murongkong naturally wanted Lin Yu to leave quickly, but for Bailey Hong Ai, she came here specifically to find Lin Yu. If Lin Yu was gone, then it would be boring to stay here. Bailey Hong Ai just smiled, and finally turned around and looked at Murongkong. "Mr. Murong, I'm a little tired today, so I won't bother you here anymore. Goodbye." After Bailey Hong Ai finished speaking, he left with Lin Yu. At this time, Murongkong was hit and a dark fire rose in his heart. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 602. At this time, Murong Changa and Dugu Qinghong were also chatting happily. Murong Changa was indeed capable of making Dugu Qinghong laugh one after another. Dugu Qinghong just kept hiding his face and smiling sweetly. At this time, Murong Changa squeezed the small medicine bottle in his hand, and a strange color flashed in his eyes. At this time, he was also slightly confused. For him, he really didn't know who he was. Should I use this medicine this time? Murong Changa knew very well that although the relationship between Dugu Qinghong and him seemed to be good, and Dugu Qinghong was also very dependent on him, it felt like a younger sister relying on her older brother. But this feeling is not what Murong Changa wants at all, and this is not what Murong Changa thinks at all. Therefore, Murong Changa was slightly confused at this time. He took a deep breath and glanced at the small medicine bottle in his hand. There seemed to be some complexity in his eyes. When Dugu Qinghong, who was on the side, saw Murong Changa like this, he just felt that Murong Changa was a little strange, so he turned his head and glanced at Murong Changa. "Brother Murong, Brother Murong." Dugu Qinghong's voice directly woke up Murong Changa. At this time, Murong Changa just smiled. "I just remembered what happened when the two of us were children. You were really cute at that time. I don't know if you still remember the time when you were punished and came to my house to find you. I stayed at my house and kept saying that I wanted to be my wife." After Dugu Qinghong heard what Murong Changa said, her pretty face turned slightly red. She rolled her eyes at Murong Changa angrily, and her face was completely filled with a hint of crimson. "You know how to make fun of me, you know how to joke with me. Brother Murong, if you are so bad again, then I will ignore you." Dugu Qinghong said softly like this, but the two blushes on his pretty face really betrayed Dugu Qinghong's mood at this time. At this time, Murong Changa was like this. He suddenly seemed to be stunned. He suddenly had the urge to reject Dugu Qinghong as his own. At this time, Murong Changa gritted his teeth, and the devilish thoughts in his heart spread quietly from his heart. Murong Changa turned around, and in just a moment, he threw a pink elixir into a glass of wine. In just an instant, the pink elixir blended into the wine. Inside. You must know that the most amazing thing about this elixir is that although it takes effect very slowly, no matter the level of the person's spiritual power, Once the medicine takes effect, there is no possibility of unlocking it. Murong Changa handed the bowl of wine to Dugu Qinghong, and then smiled at Dugu Qinghong. Qinghong, come and drink, this wine tastes good. After hearing what Murong Changa said, Dugu Qinghong also smiled slightly, and then nodded heavily. Naturally, Dugu Qinghong couldn't have the slightest guard against Murong Changa. So at this time, Dugu Qinghong picked up the bowl of wine and drank it all in one gulp. Murong Changa's eyes were fixed on Dugu Qinghong. When Dugu Qinghong finished the bowl of wine in one gulp, the smile on Murong Changa's lips became more and more obvious. Originally, Lin Yu wanted to go back directly after leaving those two people, but after thinking about it again, he always felt that Murong Changa didn't have any good intentions towards Dugu Qinghong. He always felt that this man was a little unreliable. So at this time, Lin Yu walked towards the lobby. After Murong Changa saw Dugu Qinghong drinking the bowl of wine, he sent out an invitation. I wonder if you are free tonight. A bit of confusion flashed across Dugu Qinghong's face, and then he turned around, glanced at Murong Changa, and then whispered, Brother Murong, are you talking about me? Murong Changa nodded gently, of course, silly girl, are you free tonight? Dugu Qinghong touched his chin, and then whispered, I have time tonight, but Brother Murong, what do you want to do? Murong Changa just smiled mysteriously, guess it, if you guess it right, you will get a prize. Dugu Qinghong glanced at Murong Changa, and then started to act coquettishly towards Murong Changa. Brother Murong, what is going on? Come and tell me, okay. At this time, Murong Changa just felt a sense of relaxation and joy. He just smiled, and then said in a mysterious manner, no, I will take you to a mysterious place tonight. You want to go? And at this moment, when Dugu Qinghong was struggling, Lin Yu rushed over. Lin Yu came to Dugu Qinghong's side, and then said in a deep voice, it's getting late, it's time go back and rest. After Dugu Qinghong heard what Lin Yu said, she subconsciously wanted to nod. At this time, Murong Changa pulled Dugu Qinghong over. He just waved his hand casually, and then smiled. Qinghong won't go back now. After hearing what Murong Changa said, Lin Yu turned around, his eyes fixed on Murong Changa, and his expression slightly raised. Mr. Murong, I don't know what you mean. Why doesn't Qinghong go back? Can you tell me? Lin Yu took a step forward, and the sneer at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, Murong Changa was not annoyed, but said with a smile, of course, it's because Qinghong will go to a very interesting place with me later to find memories. After all, we have known each other for many years. Murong Changa said softly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth was more obvious, just like a successful villain. In fact, Murong Changa also inherited the despicable and shameless of the Murong family, but there were many times when Murong Changa was able to cover up this kind of despicable and shameless, which was very clever, and no one could usually find it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 603. Lin Yu turned around, glanced at Dugu Qinghong, and then winked at Dugu Qinghong like crazy. At this time, Dugu Qinghong seemed to be possessed by a demon. He ignored Lin Yu at all and winked at her, only smiling slightly. Okay, I'm really curious about what kind of mysterious place it is. After Dugu Qinghong finished speaking, he glanced at Lin Yu, and then waved his hand gently, you go back first, and tell my grandpa that I won't go back to live with you tonight. Brother Murong, let's have a good chat. When Lin Yu saw Dugu Qinghong like this, he also knew that it was probably impossible for him to persuade Dugu Qinghong this time. So at this time, Lin Yu also sighed for a long time, and then said helplessly, well, if that's the case, then okay, I'll go back first. Dugu Qinghong nodded heavily, and then waved his hand casually, go back, go back. At this moment, Lin Yu suddenly smelled a vague aroma. The aroma was extremely special. Lin Yu just felt that this aroma should not come from Dugu Qinghong. Although Lin Yu felt a little strange at this time, he didn't say much. After Lin Yu heard what Dugu Qinghong said, he turned around and left. Murong Changa also breathed a sigh of relief after seeing Lin Yu leave. At this time, the despicable and shameless plan in Murong Changa's heart was quietly taking root. Murong Changa glanced at Dugu Qinghong, and then smiled, okay, I will take you to a good place today, I guarantee you will be satisfied. Dugu Qinghong nodded, and then waved his fist, if I am dissatisfied with that place, I will hit you. The two people just looked at each other and smiled. Lin Yu, who was halfway through the journey, still felt a little uneasy, so he turned back. However, when he came to the gate of Murong's house, he felt that going back again was not justified in terms of face. So at this time, Lin Yu just sighed, oh, I really owed you something in my previous life. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he hid in the dark place and quietly observed. Of course, he would not go in so directly at this time. About a quarter of an hour later, Dugu Qinghong and Murong Changa walked out of Murong's house. Lin Yu didn't know where the two of them were going, but at this time they were just heading west. Lin Yu recalled that there was a rare grassland outside the west city gate. In this place where the land was filled with desert and yellow sand, it was naturally very rare to find a grassland. And not only that, it is not easy to see such vast stars on the grassland. It is naturally not easy to see such stars in the sky in such a place. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he felt relieved at first. Oh, it seems that the two of them just went to watch the moon and stars, which is not bad. Lin Yu just wanted to turn around and leave, but then he recalled the special aroma he smelled when he left. Lin Yu suddenly remembered that there was an extremely evil elixir. That evil elixir had extremely strong properties, and there was no way for anyone who had been tricked to get rid of it. So when Lin Yu thought of this, he couldn't help but clenched his fists, and then cursed secretly as a bastard. Lin Yu punched hard, you bastard, you deserve to die. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he headed straight ahead and rushed away. At this time, before Dugu Qinghong left the city, he felt a heat in his body and a hint of crimson on his body. Dugu Qinghong turned her head and glanced at Murong Changa beside her. She felt her heartbeat speed up, and a very special feeling quietly came to her heart. It was an indescribable feeling. Dugu Qinghong's eyes were fixed on Murong Changa, and she couldn't help but want to get closer to Murong Changa. At this time, Murong Changa seemed to have noticed something strange about Dugu Qinghong, but at this time he still deliberately pretended not to know anything and walked slowly towards Dugu Qinghong. Come over here and deliberately pretend to be concerned. Qinghong, are you okay? What's wrong with you? After Dugu Qinghong heard what Murong Changa said, he just waved his hands casually, and then someone else smiled like this, ahem, it's okay, what can I do, I just feel a little tired, the two of us should not leave the city yet, what do you think, brother Murong? When Murong Changa heard what Dugu Qinghong said, he was naturally ecstatic in his heart. Dugu Qinghong said this, which meant that the medicinal power in Dugu Qinghong's body had begun to take effect. At this time, Murong Changa's eyes flashed with concern, and then he whispered, what's wrong? Are you feeling uncomfortable? Do you need me to help you? Dugu Qinghong waved his hands hurriedly, nothing, of course there is no need for brother Murong to bother you with such a small matter. Murong Changa just smiled. Ha ha ha, if that's the case, then fine, but you, little girl, said you were going to that place today, but who would have thought you wouldn't go? But there's really nothing I can do about you. At this time, Du Guqinghong just playfully stuck out his tongue at Murong Changa. Tisk, it's none of your business, I'm happy. At this time, Murong Changa shook her head and smiled after hearing what Du Guqinghong said. That's right, who told my little princess to like it? But you're a girl, and my family isn't suitable for you at this age. If you really feel tired, I'd better find you a restaurant nearby, how about it? Du Guqinghong naturally had absolute trust in Murong Changa, so when Murong Changa said this, Du Guqinghong nodded and agreed without any hesitation. Murong Changa and Du Guqinghong found a restaurant nearby, and then they slowly went upstairs. When they went upstairs, Du Guqinghong sensed a conspiracy. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 604. At this time, Du Guqinghong and Murong Changa came to the room. At this time, Murong Changa hugged Du Guqinghong. At this time, Du Guqinghong was also struggling slightly, but now she no different than a puddle of mud. Du Guqinghong only felt that her whole body was soft and weak, and she could only be held by Murong Changa. If not, she would probably fall down at this time. At this time, Du Guqinghong's breath was like blue, and the 2 touches of crimson color on his face added a bit of charm, which made Murong Changa a little unable to control himself. Murong Changa just took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. Are you okay? Qinghong. Murong Changa just spoke so softly, and there was quite a bit of tenderness in his eyes. At this time, Du Guqinghong just waved her hand gently. No, it's okay. Qinghong, actually I have already fallen in love with you, you know? The reason why I came back this time is entirely for you. At this time, Murong Changa spoke softly. At this time, Du Guqinghong couldn't distinguish that much at all. Du Guqinghong only felt that her body was unbearably hot. At this time, she was twisting her body desperately. At this time, Lin Yu, who was on the side, heard what Murong Changa said, and felt that Murong Changa was even a little disgusting. At this time, he waved his hand, and then whispered to the side. Said. Disgusting. It's so disgusting. I've never seen such a disgusting guy. You must stay away from this kind of person when it thunders and rains in the future. Otherwise, he may be struck by lightning. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he couldn't help but wave his hands, and the look of disgust on his face became more and more obvious. And at this moment, Murong Changa was also despicable, and at this moment she was just taking advantage of others' danger. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he couldn't bear it anymore, and then he broke in through the window. At this moment, Lin Yu broke the glass with his foot, and then rushed in. After Murong Changa saw this scene, his expression was like this and he began to panic. He looked at Lin Yu warily, his eyes full of disbelief. How is that possible? When did you come in? Murong Changa's voice even trembled slightly. At this moment, after hearing what Murong Changa said, Lin Yu only had a slight sneer on his lips. His face turned cold, and a murderous aura was evident in his body at this moment. What? Just because you are allowed to do such a shameful thing and take advantage of others' danger, don't you allow me to take a good look at the face of the eldest son of the Murong family? Lin Yu said coldly. After Murong Changa saw this scene, his face instantly turned ugly, but at this moment, he took it into consideration as soon as his eyes rolled. At this moment, Murong Changa was heard. The sound suddenly became louder, and the sound was mixed with spiritual power. Lin Yu, I didn't expect you to be such a person. You actually covet King Hong's beauty, and you actually want to take advantage of King Hong's danger. Damn it, it's so abominable. How can there be such a despicable and shameless person like you? I must teach you a lesson today. At this time, Lin Yu never expected that Murong Changa could be so shameless. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he was a little stunned. At this time, he took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly, and then his eyes widened with anger. I'm not telling you, boy, you are such a despicable person, how could you be so despicable as you? I really learned a lesson today. But at this time, Murong Changa couldn't tell the difference at all. He took a step forward directly, and then came to Lin Yu. At this moment, he had a murderous intention. It was revealed at this moment. Asshole, today I must let you know what the price is. You can't afford this price. At this time, Lin Yu was not in any panic. At this time, when he saw Murong Changa attacking towards him, he just turned slightly to the side, and then followed. Then he dodged the head-on blow from Murong Changa. At this time, the footsteps outside were getting closer and closer. Only then did Lin Yu know the real purpose of this guy. At this time, a sneer appeared at the corner of his mouth. I didn't expect that you are actually so good at shouting to catch a thief. If you are ruthless today, we have a long time to come. Let's see. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he picked up Tugu Qinghong, who was on the bed, suddenly smashed through the window, and flew straight away in the distance. After Murong Changa saw this scene, his brother, who was also clenching his fists at the time, became more and more obvious with the murderous intention in his body. The reason why Murong Changa didn't summon the strange beast just now was for no other reason than because he had a guilty conscience and he still couldn't react after all. At this time, Tugu Qinghong was rubbing back and forth against Lin Yu's body. Tugu Qinghong's pretty face was red, and it looked like the red fruit, making people want to bite it. 2 mouthfuls. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu took a deep breath, calmed down a little, and then rushed out. Of course, Lin Yu would not take advantage of others like Murong Changa. At this time, Lin Yu hurriedly contacted Arya. Arya, is there any way to cure the poison? Lin Yu's voice came suddenly. After hearing Lin Yu's voice, Arya hesitated for a long time, and then said softly, I'm sorry, Master, judging from the current situation, this poison seems to be unsolvable, so. Arya's voice came into Lin Yu's mind. After hearing what Arya said, Lin Yu took a deep breath, and then calmed down a little. Damn it, why can't there be a way to cure this little girl's poison at such a critical moment? Lin Yu even had a little hysteria. At this time, Arya also looked ashamed. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 605. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Arya felt a little ashamed, and then she whispered to Lin Yu, I'm sorry, Master, this matter is all my fault, Lin Yu took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood a little. After a while, he seemed to have made up his mind. It doesn't matter. There is no way to save people. In fact, this matter is not your fault. I'll think of a way myself. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he hugged Tugu Qinghong and rushed towards the direction of Tugu's house. However, Lin Yu knew that you were in your current situation and there was no way to cure Tugu Qinghong's poison. If you tell this matter to Elder Tugu, I'm afraid that person should have no way, and it will only add trouble. So when Lin Yu thought of this, he gritted his teeth, and then took Tugu Qinghong to his room. The room where Tugu Qinghong usually lives is a little close to Elder Duobu. After all, for Lin Yu, it is better not to let Elder Tugu know about this for the time being. Although Lin Yu did not do this, sometimes I am afraid of the word misunderstanding. If a misunderstanding occurs, I am afraid that I will not be able to clear it up even if I jump into the Yellow River. After Lin Yu brought Tugu Qinghong to his room, the pair of slender jade arms directly touched Lin Yu's neck. At this time, Tugu Qinghong was also confused. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's face was also slightly shocked, and then he took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood a little. At this time, Tugu Qinghong seemed to still have a trace of reason, and there were some tears in her eyes. I After seeing this scene, Lin Yu was also a little distressed, and then he coughed lightly. Ahem, you silly girl, save some strength for yourself now, don't talk, I'll carry you into the ice water and see if I can help you relieve it temporarily, if not, then I'm afraid I can only. Lin Yu didn't continue to speak, but Zhuge Qinghong also understood what Lin Yu meant. At this time, Lin Yu was naturally very depressed. You know, in this mall, almost all poisons can be cured, but this kind of thing has not happened once or twice. And the last time it happened, Lin Yu had checked all the items in the mall, even the Beija pill in the mall that can cure hundreds of poisons, but the famous X poison cannot be cured. When Lin Yu saw this scene, he was naturally very depressed, but he was also a little helpless. After Lin Yu prepared a basin of water, he immediately threw Zhuge Qinghong in. At this time, Zhuge Qinghong, the feeling in his body, rushed towards his head so madly. Lin Yu gently put 2 fingers in, and then a ball of mist formed between the fingers, and then the water gradually froze. However, Lin Yu controlled it to a just right degree, and did not let the water freeze completely. At this time, Zhuge Qinghong trembled in the water, but the intention in his heart did not diminish at all. In the end, even Zhuge Qinghong couldn't help it. She raised her head, stared at Lin Yu with her eyes, and then whispered. At this time, Zhuge Qinghong gritted his teeth, and then hugged Lin Yu directly. Then, before Lin Yu could react, he was hugged into the water by Zhuge Qinghong. At this time, Zhuge Qinghong was even a little confused. At this time, Lin Yu also knew that it was unlikely to interpret it in the way he had just thought of, so although Lin Yu was helpless at this time, he could only be forced to do so. Lin Yu gritted her teeth, and then whispered in Zhuge Qinghong's ear, "I'm sorry for saving you." Zhuge Qinghong had no aversion to Lin Yu, and she knew exactly what happened, so she just nodded gently at this time. The next morning, when Zhuge Qinghong woke up, 2 blushes could not help but appear on her pretty face. At this time, Zhuge Qinghong couldn't say a word for a long time. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu just coughed lightly, then turned her head and looked at Zhuge Qinghong gently, and then held Zhuge Qinghong in her arms, and then said softly, "Don't worry, I will be responsible in the future," Lin Yu said decisively. After hearing what Lin Yu said, Zhuge Qinghong was naturally very moved in her heart. At this time, Zhuge Qinghong looked at Lin Yu and then nodded slightly. However, Zhuge Qinghong seemed to be a little unaccustomed to this matter at this time. His eyes were still a little empty and he looked a little dazed. After Lin Yu saw this scene, it was as if a needle had pierced his heart. At this time, Lin Yu opened his mouth, as if he wanted to say something. But Zhuge Qinghong just waved her hand gently, then turned her head and looked at Lin Yu, saying softly, "No need to say anything more, what happened yesterday, no one knows better than me, I'm just curious, why did he do this?" At this time, Zhuge Qinghong even had a hint of tears in his voice, and he looked very excited. After hearing what Zhuge Qinghong said, Lin Yu gently held Zhuge Qinghong in his arms, and then comforted her in a soft voice. "It doesn't matter, this person will always pay the price," I said. Lin Yu's eyes flashed with a bit of determination, and at this time, the murderous aura on his body became more and more obvious, and he said it in a decisive voice. Zhuge Qinghong's heart was filled with a kind of touching. At this time, Zhuge Qinghong's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and then he said it in a soft voice. "You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 606. At this time, the gloominess in Zhuge Qinghong's eyes became more and more obvious. At this time, she nodded lightly, and then clenched her fists. "Yes, we must make that damn guy pay the price, absolutely. Dugu Qinghong said almost as if he was gritting his teeth. At this time, after Lin Yu saw this scene, he coughed lightly, and then gently scratched Dugu's red little nose. His face was filled with a kind of doting. "Silly girl, don't worry about this, he will definitely repent for what he has done before." Lin Yu's voice was a little cold. Dugu Qinghong didn't know why she raised her head and looked at the man. She always felt that the man in front of her gave her an unparalleled sense of security. Dugu Qinghong nodded heavily, and the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. "Okay, remember what you said, if you dare to go back on your words in the future, then I will never let you go." After Dugu Qinghong finished speaking, he waved his fist towards Lin Yu. At this time, Lin Yu just thought that Dugu Qinghong was a little cute, so he gently scratched Dugu Qinghong's little nose, and then said with a doting look on his face, "That's natural, of course I won't go back on my word." Dugu Qinghong just chuckled, and then nodded with satisfaction. "That's pretty much it." But at this moment, there was a knock on the door. After Lin Yu heard the knock on the door, he suddenly had a bad feeling in his heart. At this time, Lin Yu couldn't help but take a breath of cold air. Dugu Qinghong's heart was in her throat. At this moment, Dugu Qinghong turned her head and glanced at Lin Yu. A bit of confusion flashed in her eyes. He looked confused, and then whispered to Lin Yu in such a low voice. "Didn't I ask you to tell my grandpa that I might have to come back a little late? What's going on now?" Dugu Qinghong spoke softly, even trembling slightly in his words. At this time, the bitter smile on Lin Yu's lips became more and more obvious, and he spread his hands helplessly. "Yesterday, I found out that after that guy plotted evil against you, he just left without coming back. Go after him, who knew something like this would happen?" And at this moment, at the door of this room, Elder Dugu said softly, "Apprentice, have you seen Qinghong? This little girl has gone. I don't know where she went. I have been looking for her all morning today. Not found." At this time, Lin Yu also took a deep breath to calm down his mood a little, then turned his head and glanced at Dugu Qinghong, and then said in a low voice, "You stay here first, and I'll go out and take a look later to see what's going on." Lin Yu whispered to Dugu Qinghong. At this time, Dugu Qinghong nodded heavily after hearing what Lin Yu said. Lin Yu just smiled. "Master, yesterday Qinghong seemed to have said that she was going to a place with Murong Changa. Now Murong Changa might know where Qinghong is." Lin Yu said softly, and then started to put on his clothes. After Lin Yu finished tidying up, he walked out immediately. At this time, when Elder Dugu saw Lin Yu, his eyes were quite confused, and then he frowned slightly. "Where has this little girl gone? I can't find anyone anywhere. I'm so worried." After Elder Dugu said this, he couldn't help but sigh so heavily. His brows seemed to be knitted together, and his eyes were quite helpless. At this time, after hearing what Elder Dugu said, Lin Yu just smiled awkwardly and scratched his head. He turned his head and glanced at Elder Dugu, and then waved his hand gently. "Elder Dugu, if we go to the Dugu family's house now, we might be able to learn about Qinghong. If we just look for it here, then I'm afraid," Lin Yu just said softly. At this time, after Elder Dugu heard what Lin Yu said, he nodded slightly, and then waved his hand casually. "Oh, no one can say otherwise. I really don't know where that boy from the Murong family took Qinghong. I must ask carefully this time. If this boy dares to bully Qinghong, I will have to give him a discount. His legs are not good." I don't know why, but after hearing what Elder Dugu said, Lin Yu just felt that he had ascended the throne, and a layer of cold sweat broke out on his forehead instantly. Elder Dugu also noticed something strange about Lin Yu at this moment, so he turned his head, glanced at Lin Yu, and then asked in a low voice, "Boy, what's going on with you? Is it possible that you were tired yesterday?" Elder Dugu stared straight at Lin Yu, with a bit of confusion flashing in his eyes, and then he coughed lightly. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Elder Dugu said, he just waved his hands, and then shook his head and smiled. No, no, I'm just a little worried about Qinghong. Let's go to Murong as soon as possible. Check it out at home. At this time, Murong Changa and Murong Fu were sitting in a room, facing each other. Murong Changa was making tea, and Murong Fu's eyes were looking at Murong Changa's hands. At this moment, he sighed, but didn't say anything more. After brewing the cup of tea, Murong Changa quickly brought a cup to Murong Fu, and then looked at Murong Fu with a smile on his face. Murong Fu just took a sip gently, and then put down the cup of tea. At this time, Murong Changa looked at Murong Fu with a smile on his face and then asked in a deep voice, "How is it? What do you think?" Murong Changa's eyes were fixed on Murong Fu, and the smile on his lips became more and more obvious. At this time, Murong Fu shook his head, then turned his head and glanced towards Murong Changa. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 607. What on earth did you get into? Tell me quickly, so you don't have to be like this with me. I will take care of everything for you, so you don't have to be afraid. Murong Fu spoke softly and unhurriedly, and then stared directly at Murong Changa, with a bit of complexity flashing in his eyes. At this time, when Murong Changa heard what Murong Fu said, his eyes were somewhat dodgy, as if he wanted to hide something. At this time, Murong Fu was also slightly angry. He slapped the table hard, and then his eyes were fixed on Murong Changa. "Changa, it's hard to say that now that things have happened, don't you want to tell me?" At this time, Murong Fu obviously already knew about that matter. After all, although Elder Dugu had rested early yesterday and didn't know much about that matter, Murong Fu already knew very well about yesterday's matter. At this time, the corner of Murong Fu's mouth evoked a bit of a wry smile, and his eyes were full of helplessness, and then he let out a long sigh. "Oh, Grandpa, yesterday Murong Changa said, and then stopped immediately. At this time, Murong Fu, who was standing by the side, understood what Murong Changa wanted to say. After doing it, he just waved his hand casually, then braided his braid, and let out a long sigh. "Oh, I'm confused, I'm just confused. What kind of woman do you want? Why did you want to touch that Dugu Qinghong, and also offended Lin Yu? Do you know what Lin Yu represents? What are you wearing?" At this time, Murong Changa buried his head very low and said nothing. "Grandpa, anyway, the matter is over now. The poison yesterday cannot be cured. I am afraid that Lin Yu and Dugu Qinghong have already cooked the raw rice, and the old guy Dugu should have done this. It's not clear yet, so," Murong Changa said in a deep voice, and then he raised his head. His eyes were fixed on Murong Fu's body, and a murderous aura was revealed from Murong Changa's body. "Out." At this time, Murong Fu, who was on the side, couldn't help but say so coldly after hearing what Murong Changa said. He smiled and then turned his head, staring at Murong Changa with his eyes fixed on him, and then he gritted his teeth like this. Said. "Confused, simply confused. You ask me to tell you what you are good at, you. I'm afraid you don't know about a god-level beast. Their power can be comparable to gods. If you offend such a person, if you wait, if he grows up, I'm afraid there will no longer be a Murong family in this fighting city." Murong Changa heard this. After Murong Fu said this, his expression suddenly condensed. A moment later, he clenched his fists, and then said through gritted teeth, "Grandpa, I don't care about you either, it's clear, but I won't stop doing it if I don't do it." At this time, Murong Changa turned his head and stared directly at Murong Fu. A sharp look flashed in his eyes, and then he clenched his fists. When Murong Fu heard what Murong Changa said, he couldn't help but let out a long sigh, and then turned his head, his eyes fixed on Murong Changa's. On the body. Do you know what the hell you're talking about right now? Murongfu's body showed a bit of murderous aura, and at this time, his eyes widened with anger. After Murong Changa heard what Murongfu said, the corner of his mouth also evoked a bit of a smile. Grandpa, what are you talking about? Of course I know it very well, and I am very sure about this matter. Please believe me. At this time, Murongfu was really angry at Murong Changa. At this time, Murongfu also sighed in such a long tone. There was also a bit of a bitter smile on the corner of his mouth, and there was a complete look between his eyebrows. It's a look of helplessness. Oh, you keep saying that you know, but I think you don't know anything. You are confused, very confused. At this time, Murongfu said coldly. At this time, Murong Changa buried his head very low and did not dare to say anything more. After waiting for a while, Murongfu also understood that there was probably no other way to solve this matter except this method. At this moment, Murongfu just sighed, "Oh, there is nothing we can do, there is nothing we can do. Now that the matter has come to this, just like what you said, there is no other way. If we don't take action, I'm afraid, by that time, it's too late for us to take action," Murongfu said in a cold voice, with a hint of helplessness between his brows. But at this moment, the servant rushed in. The servant looked a little panicked, and then he came to the two of them. Reporting to the city lord, Elder Dugu is asking for an audience. Murongfu heard it at this time. After the man finished speaking, he sighed for a long time, and there was a look of helplessness between his brows. But at this time, Murongfu seemed to have remembered something. He turned his head towards the man, glanced coldly, and then spoke in a deep voice. "Don't be so panicked. I have something to ask you for now." At this time, the servant heard Murongfu say this, and then immediately raised his head and looked at Murongfu, and then nodded gently. "Master, if you have any questions, just ask." Murongfu nodded. "Is there anyone around him?" At this time, Murongfu turned his head and stared at the servant, with a strange color flashing in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows, and finally raised his eyebrows slightly. At this time, after hearing Murongfu say this, the servant just answered casually, "It seems that there is a young man who came to our banquet yesterday, and he came with Elder Dugu." At this time, after hearing the servant say this, Murongfu's eyes were quite happy, and then he nodded with satisfaction. Murongfu turned around and glanced at the servant, then smiled and said, not bad, there is nothing for you to do here, go down first." Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 608. At this time, Murongfu and Murong Changa looked at each other. At this time, the smile on Murong Changa's face became more and more obvious, and the smile on Murong Changa's mouth slowly came out. "Ha ha ha, it seems that things are not so bad this time." Murong Changa turned his head and stared at Murongfu, and then he said with a smile on his face. At this time, Murongfu's face suddenly sank, and then he sighed heavily. "Alas, it seems that your luck is not bad this time, but now that things have become like this, your life in the future will not be easy. Let's deal with this matter first." After Murongfu finished speaking, he walked out. At this time, Murong Changa also stood up slowly, and then followed Murongfu's steps and walked out. At this time, Lin Yu just clenched his fists, his eyes flashed with a bit of gloomy murderous intent, and his face suddenly turned cold. At this time, after seeing Lin Yu like this, Elder Dugu, who was standing by, just felt that Lin Yu seemed a little strange, so he turned his head and looked at Lin Yu, and then asked so intimately, "Little guy, what's wrong? Looking at your expression, it seems a little unnatural. What happened?" Elder Dugu said with a smile on his face, his eyes staring straight at Lin Yu, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, Lin Yu heard what Elder Dugu said, and he just waved his hand gently, and then shook his head. Nothing, nothing. But there was obviously some evasion in Lin Yu's eyes. After seeing this scene, Elder Dugu always felt that something seemed a little abnormal, but even Elder Dugu himself was a little confused about what was abnormal. Murong Fuhi and Murong Changa came late and walked out slowly. After Lin Yu and Murong Changa met, it can be said that they were enemies meeting and were particularly jealous, but at this time, Murong Changa no longer had the calmness, elegance, and indifference of a nobleman. At this time, Murong Changa looked more like a successful villain, making people want to punch him hard in the face. But Lin Yu still forcibly resisted his impulse. After seeing Murong Changa, Elder Dugu's eyes flashed with confusion, and then he frowned slightly. Changa, I heard from Lin Yu that you and Qinghong went somewhere late at night yesterday. When Murong Changa heard this, Elder Dugu just coughed lightly, and then smiled. We did go to the grassland outside the west of the city yesterday, but I just sent Qinghong back. She should be at home now. I just came back. Murong Changa said this in a leisurely and soft voice. When Elder Dugu heard this, his eyes were fixed on Murong Changa, and his face was slightly raised. Changa, are you sure you are not lying to me? But I just came out of the house, and I didn't meet you. At this time, the momentum of Elder Dugu was revealed, and when Murong Changa heard this, his face became a little ugly. At this time, Murong Changa just scratched his head and smiled. This. Murong Changa hesitated for a long time and couldn't say a word. At this time, after seeing this scene, Elder Dugu was really a little suspicious. Elder Dugu took a step forward and then came to Murong Changa. Changa, I know you are a good child, and I know you will definitely not lie to me. What's going on? Tell me. When Murong Fu saw Murong Changa like this, he was just a little angry and sad for his misfortune, so Murong Fu stood up at this time. You old guy, come here to scare my grandson again? Your granddaughter must not be lost in the mansion now. Besides, what kind of person Changa has been since childhood, don't you know it? Murong Fu said softly. Murong Changa heard it, and Murong Fu nodded continuously after saying this, and then stared at Elder Dugu with a smile on his face. Yes, Elder Dugu, others don't understand me, don't you understand me? Elder Dugu stared at Murong Changa, and then took a deep breath. He calmed down a little, and then turned his head away. I won't listen to anyone about this matter. I'll go home to see my granddaughter first. If I don't see my granddaughter this time, you're dead. It's obvious that Elder Dugu was really angry at this time. Elder Dugu just flicked his sleeves, and then turned around and left. After Elder Dugu left, Murong Fu and Murong Changa also breathed a sigh of relief. Lin Yu stared at Murong Changa, and the murderous aura on his body was even more dignified at this moment. At this time, Murong Fu, the old fox, just smiled, but the smile of Murong Fu was unusually deep, making it impossible for people to figure out the truth of this old fox. Murong Fu just coughed lightly. Ahem, young man, if you are not satisfied with anything, you can tell me. If there is anything I can help you with, I will naturally help you. Murong Fu said to Lin Yu softly, with a smile on his face. At this time, Lin Yu just waved his hand casually. This is not necessary. I just want to remind you that people are watching God. If you do too many bad things, it is not that you will not be punished, but the time has not come yet. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he turned around and left without looking back. At this moment, Murong Fu and Murong Changa's expressions suddenly darkened. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 609. At this time, After Elder Dugu heard what Lin Yu said, the confusion in his heart became more obvious. Elder Dugu could clearly sense that these people seemed to be hiding something from him, but at this time, Elder Dugu didn't know what these people were hiding from him. After a while, Elder Dugu turned around, glanced at Lin Yu, and then whispered, "It's getting late, it's time to go." When Lin Yu heard what Elder Dugu said, he just smiled, and then nodded heavily, "No problem, I'll be there right away." After Lin Yu finished speaking, he turned around and then walked towards Elder Dugu. After the two of them left Murong Mansion, Murong Fu and Murong Changa also breathed a sigh of relief at that time. At this moment, Murong Fu clenched his fists, and the killing aura in his body was unreservedly revealed at this moment. At this moment, after seeing this scene, Murong Changa also took the opportunity to attack Murong Fu. At this moment, Murong Changa turned his head and glanced towards Murong Fu, with a flash of anger in his eyes. Bloody murderous intent. "Grandpa, we can't just let this matter go. We must make this guy pay the price when the time comes." At this time, Murong Fu heard what he said. After Murong Changa said this, he felt quite helpless in his heart. He forced a smile on the corner of his mouth. He just sighed for a long time, and then left. "Shake off. Oh, let everything go as it comes. How can we say it well now that we have so much to say?" At this time, Murong Changa opened his mouth after hearing what Murong Fu said, as if he wanted to say something else, but at this time, Murong Changa was directly interrupted by Murong Fu. "Okay, let's not talk about this for now. You should go and see what your brother is doing now." At this time, on the top floor of Fenjiao Pavilion, a man wearing light blue robes was holding a girl with a very good appearance and figure in his arms. In front of the man was a man wearing a black robe. At this moment, the man in black robe just turned his head with a smile on his face, and then glanced towards the man. "I have some great news for you, do you want to hear it?" The man slowly turned his head and glanced at Murong Kong, the smile on his lips became more and more obvious. At this moment, Murong Kong was also stunned for a moment, then turned his head, glanced at the man, and then whispered, "A piece of great news for me? Are you sure?" After the man heard what Murong Kong said, the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and then he just coughed slightly. "Ahem, of course I'm sure, and I'm very sure. Do you want to hear the news?" After Murong Kong heard what the man in black robe said, he just pondered for a moment, and then he waved his hand gently, and the smile at the corner of his mouth showed up at this moment. "Okay, of course I like to hear news that is good for me, and it's best to have more of this kind of news, the more the better." At this time, Murong Kong just spoke softly and unhurriedly. At this time, the man in black robe heard what Murong Kong said. After Murong Kong said this, his eyes were fixed on Murong Kong, and the playfulness in his eyes became more and more obvious. After waiting for a while, the man seemed to have remembered something, and he just shook his hand casually. "Yes, for some news, the more the better." At this time, the smile in the corners of the man's eyes and brows gradually began to become apparent. After waiting for a while, Murong Kong seemed to have remembered something. He turned his head and glanced at the man. A look of solemnity flashed across his face. "I want to ask you something, and you have to answer it truthfully." The man saw that Murong Kong's face was so solemn, and a hint of solemnity flashed in the corners of his eyes and brows, and then he nodded gently, "This is natural, how dare I ask Mr. Murong's question, neglect." After the man said this, he couldn't help but laugh out loud. At this time, after Murong Kong heard the man say this, the smile on the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and then he said softly, "Actually, it's not a big deal. But even Lin Yu and Dugu Qinghong, the poison must have been planted in both of them." After the man in black robe heard what Murong Kong said, he couldn't help but look slightly shocked, and then he turned his head and glanced at Murong Kong, his expression was there was a bit of solemnity in his eyes, as if he was looking at a monster. Where did you learn this? After Murongkong heard what the man in black robe said, he just waved his hand casually, and then shook his head and smiled. Ha ha ha, where did I get this news? You don't need to worry about this. You just need to tell me the result. The black-robed man heard what Murongkong said, and just pondered for a moment, then nodded slightly. What you said is indeed true, it has indeed been planted. Is there any problem? At this time, Murongkong heard what the black-robed man said, and at that time he couldn't help but laugh out loud, and then nodded slightly. Ha ha ha, not bad, it's really good, I knew it, I knew it. At this time, the black-robed man saw the smile on Murongkong's face, and some extremely complicated emotions emerged in his heart, but at this time he still pretended to be happy on his face. Ha ha ha, worthy of being the second son of the Murong family, his mind is indeed extraordinary, this time his mind is indeed not comparable to this ordinary person, I really admire it. At this time, Murongkong heard what the black-robed man said, and then he took a step forward, and then approached the black-robed man. Murongkong spoke slowly and coldly. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 610. Are you sure that's what you think? Murongkong's eyes were focused on the mask of the man in black robe. Although Murongkong could not see the expression of the man in black robe through the mask, Murongkong also knew the mask of the man in black robe at this time. The expression below will definitely be interesting at this time. Murongkong just stared at the man in black robe with a smile on his face. When the man in black robe saw this scene, he pondered for a moment and then just laughed loudly. Ha ha ha, you are indeed the second young master of the Murong family. Indeed, you know so much, and I am indeed a little unhappy. But actually, after thinking about it, I should also be happy. After all, knowing more means that this young master Murong is indeed with such strength. If you cooperate with a strong person, everything will be done with half the effort, but if you cooperate with some incompetent people, it will often hold you back, so if you think about it, I should be happy. After Murongkong heard what the man in black robe said, he just waved his hand casually. A bit of contempt and ridicule flashed in his eyes, obviously he didn't believe the nonsense the man in black robe said. Murongkong just snorted coldly, and then said in a deep voice, "Forget it, I don't bother to pay attention to you. Anyway, I'm afraid only you know your true thoughts." Murongkong just spoke softly and unhurriedly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, after hearing what Murongkong said, the man in black couldn't help but laugh loudly. Ha ha ha, Master Murong is Master Murong, I really admire you. At this time, after hearing what the man in black robe said, Murongkong's face became slightly ugly, and then he waved his hand gently to the side. "Forget it, I'm too lazy to tell you. So much, it's useless to talk about it." After waiting for a while, Murongkong just pushed the woman out. After the man in black robe saw this scene, he just felt it was a little interesting. He turned his head and glanced at Murongkong, just took a deep breath, and then calmed down a little. Feeling. This time, let's just get straight to the point. What do you think? In fact, the eyes of the man in black robes were fixed on Murongkong in front of him. At this time, Murongkong was also facing forward, taking a step forward, and finally ended up like this. A loud laugh. Ha 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 ha, okay, since you have said so, then of course I have to agree. In fact, the man in black robe also knew that Murongkong came to him this time for something, and there was indeed a reason why he kept doing this. Although the man in black robe at this time also felt that he might be a bit radical in doing so, he obviously didn't care so much anymore. The man in black robe knew that he had lost in this first game, but in this first game, those small losses were nothing. The man in black robe half squinted his eyes, then turned his head and glanced at Murong Kong. He took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. I have something to ask you. At this time, after Murong Kong heard what the man in black robe said, the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. You talk and I listen, you ask and I answer. At this time, the positions between Murong Kong and the man in black robes were instantly reversed. The man in black robe no longer dared to look down upon the second young master of the Murong family, who was called a playboy by the outside world. At this time, the man in black robe just smiled like this, and then said softly, I don't know if you hate your brother. The man in black robe just spoke softly and unhurriedly, the smile at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious, and there was quite a bit of playfulness in his eyes. At this time, after Murong Kong heard what the man in black robe said, his face turned slightly ugly. He just turned his head and glanced coldly at the blood on his body. The aura became more and more obvious at this time. What do you mean? Why can't I understand it? Murong Kong said in such a cold voice, and a roiling blood energy began to spread from his whole body. The roiling blood energy made the man in black robe even feel shuddering. This was the first time that the man in black robe felt that he could not control someone. The man in black robe also took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. After a while, he just shook his head and smiled. Don't be so nervous. I'm just saying something casually. If you don't want to hear it, I can stop talking. At this moment, Murong Kong realized that he had been completely led by this man in black robes. The situation that he had finally recovered was now taken back by this man in black robes. This feeling is really bad. So when Murong Kong thought of this, he just shook his head casually, and then waved his hand slightly. Oh, I have a headache, I really have a headache. Communicating with you is really a headache. Murong Kong said helplessly, with a bitter smile on his lips. At this time, after hearing what Murong Kong said, the man in black couldn't help but laugh loudly, and then waved his hand gently. Ha ha ha, actually you don't have to do this at all. I'm just asking you what you really think. What are your real thoughts now? How about you tell me? The man in black robe stared straight at Murong Kong, with a hint of amusement flashing in his eyes. At this time, Murong Kong slowly walked to the window. He looked around, seeing the endless blue sky and the people who were like ants. His eyes gradually became empty. Just a moment later, Murong Kong seemed like he suddenly remembered something. There are a lot of things that I can't explain, and I don't know what I'm thinking about right now. Murong Kong just said so softly, and then sighed quietly.